everyone. Welcome to another Ashram Talks session. Today, we're going to explore a really relevant topic. We all know that we're in an age where we have constant access to information, stimuli, entertainment, literally in the palm of our hands. So, we're going to look at how our satisfaction and fulfillment can start to come from within, from ourselves, rather than from an external source. And so, to guide us today in this discussion, we're joined by Abhimanyu Wolf. Welcome again, Abhimanyu. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and again, for those of you who may be listening to Abhimanyu for the first time, he's a mental health counselor, and he's also a lifelong Bhakti Yoga practitioner. So I think you likely have a lot of experience looking at these topics from different perspectives, and we're really really excited that we can hear from you.
All right, thank you very much. As always, I will start with some invocation prayers to invoke spiritual consciousness for all of us, and then we'll begin the discussion. Sakshad haritvena samasta shastrairuktasthata bhavyata eva sadbhi kintu prabhorya priya eva tasya vande guru shri charanaravindam yasya prasadat bhagavat prasada yasya prasadan nagati kutopi Dhyayanstu pangstasya yashastri sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravindam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva cha Patitanang Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All right, and so today we are speaking on the third chapter, verse 17 of the Bhagavad Gita. Yastvatmaratireva syad atmatriptas chamanavaha atmanyeva chasantushtas tasya karyang navidyate. One who is, however, taking pleasure in the self, who is illumined in the self, who rejoices in and is satisfied in the self only, fully satiated. For him, there is no duty. And just since it says one who is, however, that implies something which was mentioned in the previous verse. So I'll just read the translation for verse 16 as well, where Krishna had told his dear friend Arjuna, "My dear Arjuna, a man who does not follow this prescribed Vedic system of sacrifice certainly leads a life of sin. For a person delighting only in the senses lives in vain." And so Krishna, in today's verse, he's making a contrast. For one who simply lives for sensual pleasure, their whole life is spent in vain. Whereas for one who's actually taking pleasure in the self, they find their satisfaction within. There's no duty to perform. And Srila Prabhupada, the one giving our maybe most prominent commentary here, he says in italics, for one who is fully Krishna conscious and fully satisfied by his acts in Krishna consciousness, that person no longer has any duty to perform. And by becoming so satisfied in the self, then this person no longer takes pleasure in material arrangements like wine, women, and similar infatuations. And of course, he's speaking in the masculine tense. When he says women, he basically means, sexual attraction. So for women, that's men; for men, that's women, and so on. And so it's a very curious topic when this verse it uses the word atma many times. Atma ratir, atma triptas, atma neva santushtas. And so the question comes, who or what is that atma, the self? And it's curious, and there's a very famous verse in the epic Srimad Bhagavatam, Atma Ramas Chumunayo Nirgrantahapi Urukrume Kurvanti Ahitu King Bhaktim Itam Bhuta Guno Hari, where the same Sutta Goswami said, all different varieties of Atmarams, or those who take pleasure in the Atma or spirit self, especially those established on the path of self-realization, though freed from all kinds of material bondage, desire to render unalloyed devotional service unto the personality of Godhead. This means that the Lord possesses transcendental qualities and can therefore attract everyone, including liberated souls. And this verse it's a very famous verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's famous because it talks about how even those who are liberated, even those who are taking pleasure in the spirit self, who have lost all attraction for the distractions of this world, still, even though they have nothing to gain from this world, they still become very attracted to hear about, to recite the the transcendental qualities of Sri Krishna, of the speaker of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And so this verse is also famous because Sri Chaitanya, the Sri Krishna's avatar or descent in the Iron Age of Kali, explained this verse, I believe, in 64 different ways at different times. And so one of the breakdowns is in this word Atma, that there are 7 synonyms for the word Atma, which are as follows. One of them is Brahman, which means the absolute truth. And then Atma can mean the body, Atma can mean the mind, Atma can mean endeavor, it can mean endurance, Atma can mean intelligence, and Atma can mean personal habits. And so when we look at all of these broad definitions for what Atma can mean, the self, um, it does give us a very, um, very curious, way to try and understand it. How do we understand what is the real self that I'm taking pleasure in? And it's curious that Atma here it can refer to the body. Yet, looking in context from the previous verse where Krishna said, simply, one who lives for the senses lives in vain. So, in that context, trying to assert the body as the self here would be incomplete because the body ultimately takes pleasure from the senses. And beyond the gross or physical body, then another meaning of Atma is the mind. And yet we've talked about in previous ashram talks. What was it? Manashasthanindriyani Prakritistani Karshati. That the mind is ultimately the sixth sense. The mind is the you could say the organizing factor of the material senses, but it is still a material sense all on its own. Mind is people. There's a common saying, mind over matter. But according to the Vedic paradigm, mind is also a product of matter. It is not transcendental to matter. So from that understanding, um, simply taking pleasure in the mind, being fully satiated with the mind, that is not possible because the mind, it is of this world. Um, and then and I'm deliberately skipping over the first definition of Atma, Brahman, the absolute truth, because that is ultimately the the most appropriate use of the word Atma. But still, I feel like it's appropriate to address the other definitions of Atma or self because they all on one hand, I'm kind of negating, okay, well, it's not the body, it's not the mind. And yet, the body, the mind, the endeavor, all of these things, they are part of our experience and they are part of the, the vehicle that we are using for self realization. Um, what was it? Hari, Harinamir no Kakani, Shiguru Kandari, Sankirtana Keroyala, Dubahu Pasari. There's a song by one Saint Lochandas Thakur where he says that the holy names of Krishna are the boat, the spiritual master is the helmsman or captain, and the upraised arms of the Sankirtan party are the oars by which we row across the material existence. And I believe there's another Srimad Bhagavatam verse where it talks about how the human body is a perfectly capable boat for crossing the material existence, as long as the captain is the spiritual master, not simply our own mind or any, you know, material education of this world, but with a bona fide spiritual master, the material body becomes a suitable boat to cross over the ocean of material existence. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it said that the words of scripture, the words of Veda, such as Bhagavad Gita, they are favorable winds to help carry us across this journey of self realization, to carry us across the ocean of nescience or ignorance. And in that song by Lochan Das Thakur, he said it's the winds of prem, the winds of love for Krishna, the winds of desire to please the senses of Krishna. Those are the favorable winds to carry us across. So there are these different analogies given, but still, all of these, you know, all the material context that we're living that we have with this body, they are, they are part of the vehicle that that is necessary to cross the ocean of nescience and come back to Godhead, come to our fully self-realized state. And so, with that in mind, the fourth definition of Atma is endeavor. And I know even just, in like raw counseling terms, um, both in raw counseling terms and also in terms of karma yoga, in terms of what Krishna is talking about in Bhagavad Gita of, doing your duty without attachment for results. That is activity in the mode of goodness. The more that we do what's right because it's right, and not with an expectation of a certain result, even just in a purely material sense, that is where satisfaction tends to come in. If I'm giving my best to life, if I know I've given my best, at least I can be satisfied even if I don't get the result I hoped for. At least I'm not left regretting and wondering, oh well, will it have worked out? Will it not have worked out? Maybe I would have done good in that career, but I never gave my best to it. Um, sometimes even sometimes we avoid what's dear to us because we're afraid, well, if I try what's actually important and I fail, that will hurt very badly. So I'm going to avoid what really matters to me. I'm going to avoid the career path that I actually want to do. I'm going to avoid pursuing the person I actually want to pursue because it would hurt so much more to be rejected from what I actually want. So I'm going to go for careers that are just dead end, that are boring to me. That way, if I fail at them, it won't hurt as badly. And so sometimes this fear of not getting the result we want leads us to live a very deadening and depressing existence. So even in a material sense, we can derive great satisfaction in doing the endeavor that's right, doing the endeavor that's according to our nature. So in that sense, if we're taking the word atma here as endeavor, there is truth to that even in a material context. And then in spiritual context, I know one great saint, Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, he would say, to try is bhakti. And so we have to make our endeavor in the path of Bhakti Yoga. And they say in Bhakti Yoga, it's not just a matter of our own individualistic endeavor to ascend the path of self-realization. And it isn't simply a matter of, mercy, so to speak, alone, that it's both endeavor and mercy. In the, one of the supreme bhakti yogis, you could say, Mother Yashoda, the, mother, quote unquote, of Sri Krishna, there was the famous Damodar Leela, which is recited every year in the month of Kartik, where Sri Krishna, he was enacting the pastime of being very naughty. He was so dearly attracted by the intense love of the gopis of Vrindavan that he went to steal the butter from their the clay pots they had in their storerooms. Um, you may ask, well, why didn't they just give it, or why didn't he just ask it? It was understood that Krishna's mother had, Krishna, he was even in that more smaller village context, he was still known as a prince. His father was Nanda Maharaj, the leader of Vrindavan, and so his mother Yashoda Rani, she was the queen of Vrindavan. And so they had 900,000 cows, and thus there was no there was no lack of dairy products there. So it didn't make sense for Krishna to for any there was nothing to give to the king and queen in that sense. Um, and yet still there were so many mothers who had deep motherly affection for Krishna, and they wanted to offer that to him very, very much. And so they Krishna, he, being the indwelling super soul, he knew their hearts, and thus he went to their homes to steal their butter. But ultimately he was caught by his mother, and so she tied him up to a grinding mortar. She said, okay, well, I don't want my son Krishna to become a gunda, to become some kind of thief or gangster when he grows older, so I have to punish him. She tried to tie him up to a grinding mortar, but no matter how much rope she brought, she was always 2 fingers too short. And she would have her attendants bring more and more and more rope, and it always came up 2 fingers too short. And our acharyas, our great commentators on these spiritual literatures, explain that these 2 fingers are endeavor and mercy. And so both spiritually and materially, endeavor is very important. And so that is a very applicable meaning to this verse. Yes, tvatma ratireva syad, one who is, however, taking pleasure in endeavor, who is illuminated in his endeavor, who rejoices in it, is satisfied with the endeavor only, fully satiated. For him, there is no duty. Well, in one sense, no material duty if we're actually engaged fully in Krishna consciousness. Um, but yeah, so that is in a lot of ways. Maybe it's not fully applicable in this verse, but in a lot of ways, it is very applicable in this verse to be satisfied with doing our duty, doing our endeavor for the right purpose, for the pleasure ultimately of Krishna. Whereas when we do endeavors for the expectation of a certain gain, or we avoid the right endeavors just out of fear of them, then we aren't fully satisfied. And then the fifth meaning of Atma is endurance. Um, that one may not be so applicable in this verse, but it is said by Sri Rupa Goswami that was it Utsaha Nishchaya Dhairyat, that in order to be successful in the path of bhakti, in order to find that satisfaction we're looking for, we need to have enthusiasm, confidence, and perhaps most relevant here, patience. Again, bringing it back to the topic of today of finding self-satisfaction in the age of distraction, we're sort of actively being trained to get instant gratification. Again, it's there in the palm of our hand. Even when it comes to looking for information, the internet's there. We can just look up anything. There's no telling how bona fide the information we're finding is, but information is there. And so yeah, you know, whatever we want to some extent. It's, or if we have money, then we can just immediately buy something, have it shipped to our door. So we're being taught to have, just to have instant gratification rather than being taught endurance. Once upon a time, if you wanted to communicate long distance, you had to write a letter or travel long distances to meet someone. Nowadays, we can just, quickly text somebody, and then that creates all kinds of expectations. Well, this person should have texted me, or oh no, I should have texted them. They should have called me. And so we're not necessarily, in a lot of different ways, we're not necessarily having to build endurance, and yet for our eternal relationship with the divine, that endurance is a very valuable quality. And then number six, intelligence. And the word atma can mean intelligence, and so to I don't know that that one is so fully applicable for this verse as well. To be fully satisfied in the intelligence. The intelligence is one of the tools on on the path of self realization. But again, the intelligence of this world is ultimately a product of this world. The subtle material body is again, it's composed of the material mind, material intelligence, the false ego, and contaminated consciousness. So to insert the word intelligence here is also not a complete answer. And then the seventh definition of atma is personal habits. And so this one is, one I find very curious to be, to define atma as personal habits. And obviously, depending on whether our habits are in the modes of ignorance, passion, or goodness, we may gain greater or lesser satisfaction from them. But all of these definitions ultimately are secondary to the first definition of atma, which is Brahman, or the absolute truth. And so this definition is the one that's most appropriate for the Bhagavad Gita verse at hand, being fully satisfied in the self, Atma. And then that brings up the question, well, what is Brahman, or what is the absolute truth? And so, the Srimad Bhagavatam explains, Vedanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate, that learned sages know the non-dual absolute truth in three progressive levels of realization. And one is famously known as Brahman, or the impersonal realization of the absolute truth, just recognition of spirit, of oneness between all beings, oneness between, oneness in all of existence. It's just the um, a sort of, yeah, sort of recognition of spiritual oneness, that underneath all the material coverings there is some divine consciousness underlying everything. Then the second progressive realization is Paramatma. And here we see the word Atma again. There's Atma and there's Paramatma. So Param means, supreme, basically. So Paramatma means, no, that not only is there some divine consciousness organizing everything, but there's actually, sort of localized feature of the absolute truth. There's actually, you know, a manifestation of the absolute truth residing in my heart and in the heart of every single living entity. This Paramatma is the supreme friend. What was it? Ishvara sarvabhutanam hriddeshe arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarvabhutani yantrarudhani mayaya. That the um, that Ishvar, the Paramatma, is residing in the heart of the living entity, and this body is just like a machine or chariot that the living entity is utilizing in his sojourn in this material existence. And so this Paramatma, he's the indwelling monitor. He's the witness of all of our activities. He's the witness of all of our desires. And though we are, in our conditioned state, trying to find our satisfaction externally, the super soul, he is not at all trying to find anything of this external world. And so even taking pleasure in Atma, in Brahman, can also refer to, okay, finding satisfaction with my connection with the Lord in the heart. That Atma is not just myself, but is also Paramatma, is you could say, the Atma of my Atma, or the soul of my very soul itself, the soul of myself. That is Paramatma. There is no existence of the Jiva, the individual soul, without the super soul. And so in the Bhagavad Gita commentary of Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, he explains that there are those very fortunate souls who are Atmaram and Aptakam. They're satisfied in the self. They fulfill their desires within the self, and that these self-satisfied souls are broken into two divisions. There are the Jnani yogis, those who just cultivate knowledge of the self through, who cultivate spiritual knowledge but don't necessarily have a personal realization of what that absolute truth looks like. And then the second are the Bhakti yogis, find satisfaction in in their relationship with the divine, and they cultivate pure love for the Supreme Lord. And so this brings us to the third progressive level of realization, Bhagavan realization, that not only does the absolute truth or Brahman, not only is it a consciousness that pervades everything, and not only does that consciousness have a specific form, a localized form in my heart, but also that that supreme Atma, Akilatma, he Sri Krishna is living in his own abode in the spiritual world, and he's simultaneously existing in the spiritual realm, engaged in his divine play, and yet he's directly, personally aware of me. I have my own personal relationship with him here and now. And so finding pleasure in the self, what was it? There's Atma and there's Atmiya. One saint, he wrote an article called Atmiya K, who is truly one's own. And in the spiritual sense, we can only really say that the Lord is our own and that we are his alone. In material consciousness, our the more our actions, the more our mind is dictated by false ego. We tend to claim things of this world as mine. That if I'm identifying, okay, I'm a man, and therefore respect is mine. My spouse is mine, my children is mine, my money is mine, my house is mine. All of these things are mine, but all of these mines are stemming from a sense of false ego. Whereas when we truly understand, no, I'm a small particle of spirit, Jivera Svarupa Krishna Nitya Das, that I'm a small particle of that Brahman, Jiva Brahma. Um, so even just recognizing that, okay, I'm consciousness, I'm not matter. That's applicable in this verse. Just that's a way of taking pleasure in the self. That I'm not of this material world. I am pure consciousness. There's a great pleasure and relief that comes from that. And then deeper than that is recognizing, okay, there's my Atma, my nature is ultimately as a servant, as an eternal servant of Krishna. And in one sense, the absolute truth, Sri Krishna, is my Atma, you could say, or he is the soul of my soul. The Brahma Samhita says, Goloka eva nivasati akilatma bhuta. So there's Atma, there's Paramatma, and then there's Sri Krishna himself, who is known as Akilatma, or the soul of everything in all spiritual and material existence. And so our taking pleasure in the self, part of it does involve some level of a withdrawal of the senses, of first accepting, okay, all my trying to find satisfaction in external sensual pleasures, first I have to let go of any illusion about that. I have to recognize, okay, that is not going to give me the satisfaction I look for. And and then, getting back on the topic of endurance, that again, sensual pleasure, it's sort of like an instant gratification, hand to mouth. Now it feels good. Whereas the the satisfaction that comes from within the self, both from just recognizing one's spiritual existence as consciousness, and then more deeply recognizing that, yeah, I actually, am an eternal servant of Krishna by offering myself in devotion to him. There's a deeper satisfaction there from acting in accordance with my eternal nature. It takes some endurance, and it's a more, you could say, sukshma, a more subtle and refined pleasure. And so yeah, there is some deliberate cultivation of patience, of endurance on this path of bhakti, um, in giving at least some time every day for that internal and eternal relationship with the divine. And so I will pause there for now. If there are any questions or comments, I would be glad to take them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abhimanyu, for everything that you've shared, for kind of helping us go a little bit deeper into this verse. So, looking at this verse, based on what you were explaining, we can equate taking pleasure in the self as kind of acting in accordance to our own nature, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Um, we have one comment from Colleen that I'll just add. She said, amazing class. Thank you, Abhimanyu and Sienna. Love the boat analogy, winds and captain. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Colleen. I know there's kind of a lot of emphasis on the fruits of our actions, right? Or the results of our actions.
Hmm.
Not wanting to act kind of only being attached to kind of producing or enjoying those results. Um, but I guess realistically, how can we, kind of go through our daily lives, try
Hmm.
our best, right? In everything that we need to do, but also trying to be aware of, not being attached or is it even realistic to think that we, um, should try not to enjoy the results of those actions,
Hmm.
or is it more about just, not making that the goal? I don't know if I'm formulating the question really enough, but I think this is kind of a really relevant topic around these verses.
Hmm. No, thank you for that. Yeah, it's you know, on one hand, it sounds really idealistic. On the other hand, it almost sounds so idealistic as to the point of being impossible. How can I give my all to something and not be attached to the result? How can I try for a degree without being without being attached to actually graduating and getting that
Yeah.
degree? How can I work a job without being attached to the income that comes from it? Um, and so, yeah, I feel like it's a lot of it comes in just the simple acceptance that I'm not in control of that result. That um, it's what was it? Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Ahe Sudridha Nishchoy Krishna Bhakti Kaile Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. That firm faith is the is the firm conviction in the sublime that by engaging in my relationship with Krishna, all my duties, all my sustenance in this world is going to be taken care of. Was it um, Rakshishyatiti Vishvaso Goptript Vivaranam Tata, that Krishna is my only protector and Krishna is my only maintainer. So it's the simple fact that, yeah, I have to make my endeavor. Like Krishna says in the Gita, nobody can survive in this world without work. So I have to work. At the same time, there's just the awareness that ultimately, even if I think I have a secure job, sometimes companies go under, sometimes people get laid off. If I have then I say, okay, well, I'll start my own business. Then no one can lay me off. Business can go slowly sometimes. It's sort of recognizing the miracle that goes into us being even able to sustain ourselves, that we never have a true guarantee that our effort will carry the desired result. In a very fundamental sense, I never have a guarantee that I'm going to get clients in my private practice. By Krishna's grace I have been, but there are slow periods sometimes where less clients come. And so whatever kind of security we want in this world, the Srimad Bhagavatam talks about the concept of fallible soldiers that we rely on. Maybe it's our spouse, our children, our career, our bank balance, our nation, whatever it is. There are so many fallible soldiers we rely on to try and protect us in this world. But they themselves are fallible, and anything we rely on in this world is subject to the modes of nature. It's subject to time, and so it's yeah, my understanding that it comes to the simple realization that the result is not truly dependent on my endeavor alone. That it's again, what was it? The five factors of action. There's the endeavor, and I don't think I'll remember all of them off the top of my head, but the five factors of action. There's the endeavor. There's the place. There's the senses. I'm forgetting one of them, but the fifth and final is the super soul, the sanction of the divine for anything to come into play. And so it's just recognizing that, yeah, my endeavor is only one factor in the result. It's an important factor. It's a necessary factor. If we don't give any endeavor toward anything, there's not much reason to believe that the divine would sanction it for us. So it's recognizing that my endeavor, it's important, but it is in the end only one factor in the results coming about.
Yeah, no, thank you for framing that. I think in a way that's a lot easier to grasp, right? Because like you said, it sounds intense, right? Not to be I don't know, not to enjoy kind of the results of these actions. But I like that you mentioned we need to kind of take a minute to realize that it's a miracle that if anything goes well at all, right? Like there's so many
Yes.
factors that go into that. And I think in the last two classes, we've also kind of touched on those topics a little bit, right? Like I don't know, like not everything is ours for the taking, and not everything good that happens in our lives is a direct result of our own efforts, right? There are so many
Right.
forces at play there. So thanks for reminding us of that as well. And before we end today, I just, kind of touching on the topic of this class, I wanted to ask you as a mental health counselor, do
Hmm.
you find, again, in this age of distraction, um, do you find that people are struggling to obtain more satisfaction from themselves or from within?
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of that, and generally, I find that the more, so to some extent, it's within my own self as I, try to, overcome any bad habits or, and cultivate spiritual good habits, and to some extent, I definitely see with my clients. The more usually that distraction comes from an emotional place of some kind of distress. It's from one of the lower modes of, okay, well, actually, I'm really angry, I'm really stressed, I'm really frightened about something, I feel lost, I feel overwhelmed, I feel confused, and so it just feels emotionally easier to give into distraction. So the distraction nearly always does not come from it does not come from a place of satisfaction. It comes from a place of discontent and often overwhelm. It's like I'm so overwhelmed that the breaker flips, and now I just want to kind of zone out and do nothing. So that is definitely something I see, and to some extent, this is the material world. I'm sure that overwhelm has always been there. It's just now in the modern age, you know we have so many instant gratification ways of trying to cope with that overwhelm. Um, so so yeah, I definitely see that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for shedding light on that. And yeah, thank you again just for taking the time to go through this verse today. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined us as well and for your comments. And we look forward to seeing you again soon, Abhimanyu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. All right. Well, thank you again to everyone who joined us today as we continue to go through the Bhagavad Gita verse by verse. We hope that you'll join us in our next class Monday at 7:30 p.m. to continue through chapter 3.